Ashland. So we're going to examine an artifact that Henry gave to his wife, mother of his children, and in the process talk about motherhood. So all you mothers out there, thank you for all you do. We appreciate that, and we're here today in some part to salute you. And we're starting today, we're coming today from the nursery, which seemed like a good place to talk about mothers because it's where we talk about children. Before we move further, I want to take a minute to thank Dupree Mutual Funds for their support of our program. They're our sponsor, and we very much appreciate their sponsorship, which makes it possible for us to do this every Tuesday and Thursday. Also, please remember that on our Facebook page, we have a donate button. If you're enjoying this program or have enjoyed other programs we've done or enjoying the grounds, etc., please feel free to go to our website and make a donation. We would very much appreciate that. That's helping us keep going and keep us delivering the content that we're delivering right now. I see we've got several mothers already joining us. One of our volunteers, one of Henry Clay's descendants and the mother of another of his descendants is currently watching. A few more volunteers. So we appreciate that. My colleague Kate is at home watching, and she'll be helping me to look for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to add them, and I'll answer them as we go. So, and as Julie points out, if you would like to make a donation in honor of your mother, we would greatly appreciate that. And we think mothers would be honored to have such a donation. So think about that. If you haven't already gotten a Mother's Day gift, it's not too late. So I'm real quick here, and turn the camera around. We'll pan around the nursery just a little bit, just to put us in the mood. We got some cribs, toys, baby cups. There's a baby cup right there. A couple more baby cups over here. Oh, that's Nanette with her son Thomas. So there's a mother and child right there. Some baby eating utensils and whatnot. These were baby gifts. So here's a music box. It was used by a mother of some of the descendants. Came from her family. So lots of stuff related to childhood. But the artifact I want to feature today is right over here. And we'll start with this. This was what was actually on the website yesterday. It is a pearl necklace, as you can see. It's a very, very fine necklace. I'll try to get in here close so you can see these seed pearls. They are extremely tiny. The work is incredibly fine. There's my wife. Good morning. That probably means my cat is watching as well and going crazy, so gotta like that. The set, this is part of the set. It also has earrings. You can see the earrings here. Here are a pair of brooches. And all of these seed work are mounted on silk and on mother of pearl, and ultimately with gold fixtures. This is a tiara to be worn in the hair. Again, let's get right up close. You can see exactly how tiny these little pearls really are. Extremely, extremely small. These are called seed pearls. These particular pearls probably originated in the Persian Gulf. That's where you go to find pearls like that. I think they still produce them today, although I'm not sure you can get them quite this fine at this point. I've been asked about seed pearl versus regular pearl, and it's really about size. A regular pearl, let's see here. Well, if you look at this, at the brooch, some of those larger pearls get almost to the size of a kind of a standard pearl. The little tiny small ones, like you see here on the brooch, those are seed pearls. And they're just extremely small. Haven't been in the oyster very long, I guess, to make them larger. So that's what seed pearls are, and they are often laid in this fashion. This is called pavé, or paved with pearls. You can pave with other stones as well, but that's one way that seed pearls are often used. Now, this particular set was probably made in Paris, France. It was a hub for jewelry of this sort in Henry and Lucretia's time. And we know that Henry was actually in Paris, France, after the negotiation of the Treaty of Ghent, which concluded on December 24th, 1814. Clay made his way through Europe ultimately going to England, where he was going to negotiate some additional trade treaties with the British. And he stopped in Paris on the way. So he would have been in a position to acquire this jewelry, and we think that's when he did, and that he brought it back for Lucretia. And this jewelry passed on through the family and was given to us by one of Henry Clay's descendants a number of years ago. So it's an incredible set. It's been conserved. That was an incredibly tedious process. We have a very, very fine textile conservator. It involved single strands of silk, which are incredibly fine and about the finest needle you can possibly get, like a surgically fine needle, and very, very steady hand and keen eyesight. So they are actually in really pretty good shape. I don't know that you could ever wear these, but they're in pretty good shape for what they are. So here's Lucretia. This is actually a reproduction of a daguerreotype that is at UK. It is in the Henry Clay Memorial Foundation papers there, which were papers that came from Ashland. About 1991, we moved most of our archives over there because we're just not a research repository. We're not here for researchers, generally speaking. We have researchers that come, and that's not to say that we discourage researchers. We are glad to help researchers, but it's not really our primary mission, whereas it is at UK. And the Henry Clay Memorial Foundation papers can be accessed through their website. If you Google Explore UK, after you get past the first couple of listings, Exploring Britain, there's a listing for the UK Special Collections, and you can search it. And if you search HCMF papers, or you can search Lucretia Clay, this will come up, and you can look at the photo. You can actually look at all of the photos in the HCMF papers, and there are thousands. It's an extremely extensive collection, which I use often. So it's well worth a look. Here's Lucretia. This is later in life, probably 1850, maybe late 1840s, something like that. The young man next to her is her grandson, Henry Clay III. And in addition to being a mother, Lucretia also became a parent to some of her grandchildren when some of her children died. And Henry III was one of those. His father, Henry Clay Jr., died in the Mexican War, and his mother had already passed after giving birth to his brother Tommy. So Lucretia and Henry took him in. In fact, at one point, somewhere not long before this photo would have been taken, Henry noted that they had had several grandchildren living at the house and that it had become like having children all over again. So, and they were actually kind of enjoying that. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't easy, but it seemed to be something that provided some degree of pleasure to them. So it's nice to see Lucretia in this mode. It's one of the more realistic pictures of her, and it's nice to see her with one of the youngsters. Henry and Lucretia were married on April the 11th, 1799. They were married for 53 years and had 11 children, so they had a large family. Of course, Lucretia would have had responsibility for managing those children. She took care of home life. In fact, Henry Clay said of her, and I'm going to grab my paper here because it's an extensive quote, but it's, I think, a really great quote. "I have been so long and so deeply absorbed in public affairs as to be compelled to surrender to this beloved partner of my joys and sorrows sole management of our domestic concerns, and how diligently, how nobly she has performed the duties devolved upon her can be known to no mortal save myself alone." So what he's saying is, I was gone a lot. I turned over the house and the family to her, and only I know what she's been through and how hard she's worked at taking care of that. I know some of our listeners are observing that she looks rather old and worn down. Well, again, by the time this picture was taken, she probably would have been in her late 50s or early 60s. So she had aged some. She had been through a lot, both with Henry Clay's career and the public duties that involved, but also taking care of a large family, of which she lost several. So the tragedies and difficulties of life certainly show upon her. It is worth noting, no gray hair. There is some possibility she's wearing a wig. We aren't sure. Whatever the case, she doesn't evince any gray hair in the picture, so that's something to be said. Being a mother was not an easy thing for Lucretia because her husband was who he was. One of her descendants, her daughter-in-law, describes her as a national woman, meaning that she was not only a housewife and mother, etc., she had to live in the national spotlight because that's where her husband lived. And it meant she had to do things that otherwise she wouldn't have had to do. For example, she traveled with her husband to D.C. regularly until 1835. So she was going back and forth, spending lots of time on the road, and that meant that she sometimes was rather uncomfortable. She had several children in D.C., at least one of which not long after arrival. Henry Jr. was born shortly after arriving home. In fact, so shortly that he was born in the dining room. He tells us that in his diary. So we think that they got home and that was as far as they could get. Something like that. Anyway, so being on the road had a lot of challenges. When she was in D.C., in addition to managing the children and all of that, she also had to do things like throw events, what were called levees or parties for Henry Clay. And they weren't just social, it wasn't just for fun. These were opportunities for political figures to interact outside the halls of Congress and to lay the groundwork for business that they were otherwise going to do. And Lucretia had to do that no matter what the circumstances. Several times she lost children. In fact, one of her children is buried in Washington, D.C. in the Congressional Cemetery. So whatever was going on in her personal life, she had to soldier on and continue to do these things to support Henry Clay's career. So that's a lot. I mean, in a lot of ways, she was a working mother. And she had 11 children. Those children could be difficult. Her sons in particular were challenging. If you read accounts of them growing up, they could be pretty mischievous and exhibit some pretty difficult behavior. In fact, she had one son who later on was shown to have significant mental illness, and it may be that some of that manifested in childhood. So she had a lot to deal with as a mother, as she raised her family. She loved her children immensely. Her friends said of her that she often preferred being in the company of her children, being in the background, taking care of the family, to public duties, and that she did those things very, very well. Discipline would have been her responsibility. During this period, women lived within what was called the sphere of domesticity, and they were expected to take care of the family, manage the children, and to put those children on the right path for future life, to set them on a course for success going forward, and that meant discipline. One of the ways Lucretia did that was through religion. It also provided a tool for her to deal with the difficulties of being a mother and a wife. In fact, Henry said of her, she has a resource which I have not, meaning religion. We know from accounts of the family that she was willing to be strict when she needed to be. For example, one of her grandsons, she banished from Ashland. I'm not sure what he did. That isn't clear in the record, but it is clear in the record that at some point he did something so bad that she said, look, you just can't be here. I'm not going to have you being an undue influence on the other grandchildren or the rest of the children or anyone else. So sorry, you can't be here. You must leave and you can't come back. And he begged and begged to return. I'm not sure that he ever did. He died young. So I think unfortunately that may have been unresolved. But it was something she felt she had to do, and she was willing to do that to protect the other children in her care. Now, you may wonder how she did it all, and certainly she had some aids, some tools, some resources that not every woman did. As a woman of the upper class, she had people that took care of the children, etc. She had a paid housekeeper named Sally Hall, who was English. We'll probably talk more about her in the future. She would have managed the house in many ways, been the ultimate authority in the house. She also had an enslaved woman named Charlotte Dupuy, whom we'll, I'm sure, talk about in the future. Charlotte would have taken care of the children. She would have done a lot of the hard labor, the dirty labor that goes into taking care of a family and children. For example, I'm going to come over here. Some of you may have seen this before or seen similar ones. That's called a chamber pot. That's a toilet. And several times a day, probably, certainly in the morning after the night, people like Charlotte, who were enslaved, would come and empty the chamber pot. So they would have to take that out, empty it into the outhouse, clean it, and put it back here inside the washstand. So that's the kind of duty that Charlotte had. And because of people like Charlotte, Lucretia was able to raise and manage her family. So she definitely had resources that not every woman at this time would have, that made it possible for her to be the national woman that she was. So we're going to take the opportunity, again, to recognize all the mothers out there, and thank you for the things that you do. All of us benefit from the love of our mothers. I certainly do. I wouldn't be here today were it not for the love of my mother and the strict hand that she took when she needed to do so. So thank you to all of our mothers out there. If there are any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them regarding Lucretia or any other mothers in the family. Well, again, thank you very much for watching. We'll look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday. Please visit the website. You can learn much more about the collection there. We have an online catalog. Don't forget the donate button. Shop the museum store. And again, have a good Mother's Day. Thank you very much.